So nice to see you. So as we might be waiting for a few more to join, let's just take a few minutes to settle ourselves down, best done with a focused meditation on our breath. So here we start to, if we just allow ourselves to settle down then, and of course if you need to adjust your camera or device, of course please do so, but for those who are already quite ready, we'll just take a few minutes to it is since for those of us who don't meditate very regularly or too regularly, then it is unrealistic to try to think that we could come out from what we're doing and suddenly go into meditation. So that's why even in the practice, even setting oneself up, it is advised that we slowly, because meditation, in this case, the focused meditation is more of bringing your mind inward as a way to separate oneself from the distractions. So the immediate distractions are, of course, external distractions. So thus we're in a conducive environment where we're in a quiet room, quiet space. So we just take a few minutes here to really acknowledge this quiet, relatively more quiet, relaxed, and a peaceful, and indeed a sacred space that we're in right now. Now, as we become aware of this, relatively calm, peaceful space we're in, we also can take a few moments to feel a sense of gratitude in having this opportunity. At this very moment, as we are sharing this quiet time together, there's so many in the world who are deprived of any moment of peace and quiet, whether it be in a very, very busy situation with chaotic sort of things going around, noises and so forth, or indeed in some parts of the world at this very moment, there's many who are in a conflict zone. Their very lives are at stake, let alone being able to sit quietly, contemplate. They're always in that alert of when the next shell might drop. So, these are good to take into perspective as a way to really start appreciating what we do have that we so easily can take for granted. And as we bring awareness now slowly to our physical presence here, we can then take yet another step of feeling gratitude in having this precious human body, relatively free from immediate, intense sort of illnesses and pains. We're definitely free from any defects, faculty defects, where we have a clear mind and able to think clearly, hear, analyze. All our senses are intact. And moreover, we have access to the spiritual material. We have the interest in it. Here in this case, the Buddhist teachings, which is called the Dharma. So indeed, this all constitutes to what is called having a precious human life. And we are indeed incredibly fortunate to have this condition right now at this moment of having a precious human life. So as I'm reminded by one great speaker, the Benedictine monk, hermit monk actually, he was giving a talk on happiness, and his key point on finding happiness or feeling sense of happiness within is to feel gratitude. And I find this is so true, because when we lack gratitude, it's usually when we feel way down and we have a mind which we feel we're lacking. We feel unhappy. So we have so much things to feel happy about and rejoice. So here now to come to the actual meditation now, a focused meditation, as we're being aware of our physical presence, we take a moment to ensure that we're sitting in an attentive posture, not a rigid one, a relaxed posture, but an attentive one, which basically means having one's back spine straight, which allows the energy to flow well within our, and the circulation and energy, subtle energies within our body, which helps then to freshen the mind, make it a little bit more clear. Now we can gradually bring our awareness to the immediate object of our focus, which is our breath. And this is a very natural breathing rhythm that we're going to follow, just naturally breathing into our nostrils, preferably, breathing out through our nostrils, and just keeping our attention focused on that for a few moments. Now, this relatively more focused state of mind, when our mind is now, when all the bubbling thoughts have settled down a bit, we can actually get a sense of a little bit of a clear state of mind. So while we do experience a natural sense of calmness and tranquility in this state of mind where there's not too many thoughts, we're not following those thoughts, not interacting with our thoughts, we're just letting it be. So while it is quite a nice experience just to be in this state, it is still yet just a neutral state of mind. And so from our tradition, the real transformation that needs to take place within ourselves is to really develop and strengthen the positive states of mind, because it is the positive state of minds that bring about the natural consequence of a genuine sense of happiness and fulfillment, well-being within ourselves. And when I say positive state of minds here, I mean all of those state of minds which will oppose each and every undesirable, uncomfortable state of mind that we have within ourselves, that could be triggered at any moment, and then we start feeling uncomfortable, feeling agitated, sad, worried, fearful, and all of those uncomfortable emotions again. So therefore, we now set our intention for our time together in the session, that may every minute, every second of our time together become a most meaningful, worthwhile, and we can set that, we can make it, ensure that it becomes worthwhile and meaningful by just dedicating or aiming our time together to become a cause for finding genuine sense of happiness within ourselves, and then the very purpose of finding happiness within us, let's speak, so that we have the actual experience of happiness and peace to be able then to genuinely share with others. And along with that, happiness and peace, a sense of what we call the wisdom of being able to have the skillful means to actually assist and benefit others. And the ultimate state of that is to become enlightened, as it is said possible in our tradition. So since enlightenment is possible because we have Buddha nature, may our deeds and acts in the session, all the time we spent together and energy spent together, become a cause for our enlightenment, for the sake of all sentient beings. And as our teachers have reminded us again and again, just generating this thought. If it's a heartfelt, deeper heartfelt it is, then the greater impact it will have. But even if it is a mere wish, even that is incredible. For us as beginners, we might never had that wish previously, but here we're getting this opportunity to generate this wish that we want to achieve enlightenment, not for ourselves, solely for ourselves, but primarily to benefit other beings, to relieve the suffering of all beings and bring about happiness for all sentient beings. So with that positive motivation that we set, we can now gradually come out of our focused meditation by again gradually just starting to be aware again of our physical presence. And as we open our eyes wider, being aware of the immediate surrounding and coming into touch with external reality. If you wish to stretch out a bit, please do so. So I think it's a good habit to do a small revision in case, just to refresh our memories for those who have been coming, but in case someone has missed a session or others who might be joining for the first time. So as presented from our very first session, this text, a very incredible, powerful, transformative, when put into practice at whatever level we can, incredibly powerfully transformative advice and techniques which are presented here, the 8 verses of mind training. Now, of course, we went into a bit of detail in our first session about how, of course, this is an advanced practice. I mean, when it is taken as a practice, and it is a very quite advanced practice, which means that it is presented. These teachings are presented with the assumption that people already have an understanding of some of the bases. Now, sometimes we may wonder why choose an advanced teaching practice here if we still feel like we haven't had much of a basis understanding yet, or not really being able to practice yet. Well, I think the simplest answer is that it can be inspiring. It can be something. It can be inspiring as to what level the practice can be taken, that it is possible. And these techniques or teachings are presented by none other than those who have practiced themselves, and they're sharing their practice and their experiences from their practices. So while the highest level of these practices can be on an inspirational level, that's something that we aspire to, what we'll begin to notice is that actually there's also many levels of these presentations which one can start to actually apply in one's daily life. One can actually, after hearing these verses, one may start, recalling some of these points, and then next time there's a challenging situation, one may actually be able to, recall some of these advices here, and then put some level of practice. And to that degree, it would serve its purpose to benefit us even now, even at the very basic levels that we are able to put it into. Just even remembering, I'll share later on of just remembering a verse for me, actually, which is the next verse we're going to cover, has at least on 2 occasions saved me from, potential trouble. So I'll share that story later if you don't mind, if you may be interested. But going back to the main point here is that all of these verses from the very beginning, our first session, we presented that, within the Buddhist path, we have 2 main paths leading to 2, specific goals. One for self-liberation, and of course, even for the path on self-liberation, it requires many practices, advanced practices as well. Basically, summarizing the 3 main trainings: the trainings of ethics, or morality, the training of concentration, and training of wisdom. Now, based on these three main trainings, actually, based on these three trainings, which are taken to another higher level on the next path, which is the greater path which leads to enlightenment. On top of these three trainings of ethics, training of concentration, and training of wisdom, what is added on top of that is a training of love and compassion, and particularly bodhicitta, as we had presented in our last sessions. Bodhicitta is actually the result of having developed unconditional love and compassion towards all beings, when based on having developed love and compassion towards all beings, and then develop what is called a superior intention, which is that it is not as noble as it is to wish all beings to be free from suffering and wanting them to be happy. I need to do something about it myself. Let me take some responsibility. So when one actually develops that sense of wanting to take some responsibility in enabling all beings to be free from suffering and lead them to ultimate happiness, one develops what is called the superior intention. And then that is the immediate cause for developing what is called bodhicitta, the most altruistic mind that can be developed on the human level. And then when that mind is developed, the bodhicitta is developed, which is the direct translation in English is the mind that, well, the direct literal translation is the awakened mind. Well, some translators say awakened mind or enlightened, the mind of enlightenment. So basically, it's a very packed in, summarized word. So to unpack it and understand it means the mind which aspires to achieve enlightenment in order to benefit, in order to alleviate the suffering of all beings and lead them to suffering. So that is bodhicitta. So when one, how should we say, develops that state of mind, then they are called, the instant bodhicitta is developed in anyone's mind, any individual being's mind, that moment that attitude, that altruistic mind is developed, in that very instant, it is said that one becomes what is called a bodhisattva. Now that's what defines someone to be a bodhisattva. And then then the training is actually, the real training is actually begun. I mean, of course, for us ordinary beings, we have to train ourselves before that, and then, but the practice of really benefiting other beings in a more significant, more, with more deeper understandings begins on the bodhisattva's path. So these trainings are actually meant for those who are aspiring to become bodhisattvas, and those who are actually already have become bodhisattvas and on the initial trainings to start to develop further. So if you recall from our earlier sessions, the main obstacle for developing bodhicitta, that altruistic mind, and then the main obstacle for developing unconditional love and compassion for others, or actively engaging in love and compassion for others, we could say, is what is called a self-centered mind. Yeah, some translations use self-cherishing mind, but I choose to use more the term self-centered. So it's a yeah. Basically, it's the self-centered mind is a mind. Of course, here we have different levels of the self-centered mind. On a very, very coarse level, on the coarsest level, that self-centered mind would be even acknowledged and admitted and acknowledged in a worldly conventional sense as being something which is, how should we say, something which is not really admirable. Basically, the coarsest level of that what we call the self-centered mind or self-cherishing mind, I'll use these terms, interchangeably. The very coarsest level of that, in a worldly sense, would be called selfishness. And so we would all relate to selfishness not being a very, nice attribute to have. And in fact, parents from very young age, parents would, teach their children not to be very selfish. They've got a few siblings, there's a cookie or the last cookie, or maybe there's only one cookie left or one piece of cake, and then one of the siblings wants to take it all for themselves, and then mom or dad would say, don't be selfish, share it with your sister or brother, right? So from a very young age, we are already, so these teachings of, self-centeredness and all of that seemingly being very difficult for us to handle actually is only when it comes to a more subtle level. But on a basic conventional level, we've already all learned that from a very young, as we grew up, to be kind, not to be selfish. And then, of course, as we grow up, then, we realize that sometimes we have to, fend for ourselves, and it may appear to be selfish to others, but we justify that we need to fend for ourselves. But when that selfishness is taken on a more subtler level, then even in the conventional sense, can still be seen as a undesirable or unfavorable sort of trait. And that is when, now selfishness can be very obvious when you actually take more than your share, or you completely ignore others, and you're actually being outright greedy and depriving others of things. Then that is very obvious, a very obvious level, and that is what we would call, in a worldly sense, selfishness. But then on a little bit more subtle level, which is harder, which is still acknowledged on the conventional level in the worldly sense, but hard to detect, would be called, I think it's, please help me to pronounce the word, because my pronunciation is not too good here with some of these words, but not narcissism. Not narcissism, is that how you pronounce it? Narcissism. When people are really focused on just really on themselves. And narcissism can be sometimes on a more subtle level, that they may appear to be nice, whatever. And usually in relationships, you often hear that the reason why the relationship to work out with the other person is because they found out later that they are a narcissist. Yeah, is that how you pronounce it? Narcissist. And we can see that that's a harder level to detect, because initially someone may appear to be generous and kind, but if they're inside thinking about their own means and actually getting something out of the others, then that seemingly nice gesture and kind gesture initially, when it is found out later that it was not really a genuine kind act, but was really something to get something in turn for themselves, or in fact, I think narcissism will be on a level where you actually exploit others. You show some sort of kindness on the surface, but actually later you take complete advantage of the other and then exploit others and take for one's own advantage. So that is when, on a worldly context, we would understand as being narcissism or narcissist, and would be then considered as a negative trait. So here in Buddhism, actually, that level of self-centeredness is taken even to a much more subtler level where then when it does come down to a more subtle level, then that's when we start to get a little bit challenged, because we may consider ourselves, quite a kind person, or generous or considerate, and we may all feel like, yeah, I'm not a selfish person. I'm quite considerate, and we feel like, there's no real problem here of being self-centered. But at a very deeper level, according to the teachings on Buddhist psychology, it actually pinpoints down to all our problems actually arising from a very subtle level of self-centeredness. And that subtle level of self-centeredness is actually so subtle that we don't even consciously think about it or aware of it. But if we were to honestly check ourselves, which we are then tend to do when these teachings are taken to a whole different level, when we really do an honest check on ourselves, although we may not go out declaring that to others, or initially even to oneself, but if one does a really more subtle investigation, we might start to notice that there is a tendency of feeling to have a tendency that of feeling that one is actually the center of the universe. Yeah, that everything else revolves around how it affects me. What is it in? What is there? Whatever is happening, whether it's a relationship, whether, and I dare say here, even in the spirituality, what is there in it for me? What can I get out of it for me? So when whatever one does, if we were to really check and look into our subtlest intentions, we might detect that there's this notion of like, what is there in for me? That me is always in the center. Yeah. And that is, I think, where the English expression of like being the center of the universe, is where that self-centeredness is really coming from. Yeah. So there is no wonder that these teachings take it on a more and more deeper level to try to overcome deeper and deeper levels of that self-centeredness. And of course, the deepest levels can be only overcome by when developing, higher levels of wisdom. But nevertheless, here we are even at the beginning level, and this is all mentioned here so that we understand that although some of this practice may seem very far-fetched to us as ordinary practitioners, when we understand the context of these teachings, then we would understand that, oh, okay, for those who are really willing and wishing to take their practice and their integrity of really looking into themselves and wanting to overcome even subtler levels of self-centeredness, then this practice would be indeed not inappropriate at all. It would be actually a practice to really then be able to put that into practice and put others' needs first rather than one's own personal needs. Yeah. So I know this will bring up many questions on different levels, but we will I'm just giving the premises here as a way to understand why these teachings seemingly seem to be like where you kind of like almost, okay, so here at this point, before I forget, and I think this is a very crucial and important point that I like to share because it's actually quite recent in my own understandings of how I came to this understanding, and it sort of became like a big revelation for myself. In my personal journey of trying to understand these teachings and even making an attempt to try to put in practice, of course, that noticing those subtle levels of self-centeredness and that being, and noticing that actually it is not so subtle, that actually whatever I do, even my practices, I dare say, are mostly oriented around me. What can I get out of this? When I start noticing that, it can be actually very painful. And the teachings, particularly the teachings which come from this genre, which is the Kadamba teachings, when we read it literally, and when it's presented and read or understood literally, it may really seem as if there's a self-reprimand on many of these teachings that I've been so that one is criticizing oneself basically. But I think what I have understood in recent times is that when some traits of being self-centered is pointed out to us, or to me as a personal experience, I become very defensive. And what I started to notice is that the reason why I become defensive on when being pointed out of certain traits, and self-centeredness being the root of all problems, I feel like, but if I don't, and especially when the word self-cherishing is used, many people have the hard time trying to, understand that. But if we don't cherish ourselves, if we don't look after ourselves, how can we ever, be able to take care of ourselves? How can we actually be able to survive, right? So that's a complete misunderstanding of what really the word self-centeredness or self-cherishing really mean, or to be understood. So the point here that I would like to make is that what is called a self-centered mind and self-cherishing mind is actually a misconception. It's a distorted state of mind, and it's not based on reality, because where the self-centered mind stems from comes from the misconception of a truly existent self, an inherently existent self. And so, and we will spend a little bit more time later, perhaps in our next session, of trying to unravel what that really means. But just for now, just as a premises here to understand the point I'm making now, is that it is said that we have, basically, it is as if we're having, we are actually holding on to a wrong notion of a self, and we hold up as being ourself, real self. So basically, in very simple terms, according to the teachings, we are grasping onto a false identity. And that grasping onto a false identity, because it's based on a distorted state of mind, a misconception, and a faulty state of mind, brings up all sort of other faulty states of mind, including that sense of self-centeredness. So the self-centered mind is not, it's based on falsity. It's not based on reality. It is not based on how we actually do exist. Although we're thinking that, I need to take care of myself, that self that we are referring to or thinking of, that we need to take care of ourselves and our needs, we talk about our needs, my needs, that my or our is actually based on a false identity we have of ourselves. So what basically the teachings are saying is that we need to get rid of that, because we are a victim of our own misconceptions of who we are. And because of the misconceptions of who we are, all of the other unwanted emotions and feelings, what we call afflictions in the mind, arise from that. So it is causing us harm. But the reason why we become defensive, or I become defensive, speaking for myself here, is that I've been conditioned for so long to believe in that false identity of myself. I think that's who I am. So when that false identity is criticized, and thus the byproducts of that byproducts of the self-identity, the identity that I'm holding on to, the false identity I'm holding on to, when those are being pointed out as being harmful to us and not good for us, we feel that I'm being blamed, I'm being criticized. We hold that false identity, we hold that misconceptions of ourselves and integrate that with all the other misconceptions that we have. And then when that is being told that it is not useful, we've become defensive because we feel that I'm being criticized. And so here quickly, I might share that also at one time when I was getting really upset and angry, as we went, and again, all of that, after that moment of outburst of anger, I started criticizing myself, and like, there we go again, you are really an angry person. And you've been called an angry monk, and there you go, you are an angry monk, you're proving it to yourself. And then there's the whole critical mind starts working in my mind. And then I had to catch myself again and say, Michael, you are not your anger. Remember, you are not your anger. And then similarly, when I had very strong desires mind, with desire is much harder because it seems so embedded. It's like everything, food and everything, the basic survivals are very much related with desire. So it's much more subtle or much harder to detect that. But with anger, it doesn't really seem like it doesn't really have much use. The moment I get upset and angry, I don't feel peaceful. My mind is agitated. It's very clear. So, but then yet, when my anger is criticized, if someone tells me I'm an angry person, I would try to be defensive. But when I'm left to myself and I do get upset and angry, and I get annoyed with myself, I get angry because I got angry, it just becomes a snowball. And then I feel guilty and I feel blaming myself. And that's again when I'm identifying my emotion of anger as with me. That is like an actually part of my identity. And so therefore, the teachings really go into very subtle details about how we are not our anger, we are not our attachments and desires. That's not who we are, essentially. And we're not our self-centered mind. That's not who we really are. And so therefore, because it's not who we really are, we need to actually begin to find who we are, in order to really reveal who we are to ourselves. We need to get rid of these obstructions. These are obstructing us from really finding us who we are. In other words, we're protecting a false self. We're protecting a false self, which only causes more harm. So our teachers are kindly pointing us of how this is harmful to us, yet at times we become so resentful towards that, and there's such strong resistance in our mind because we hold that as our being identity, and we're so embedded that sense of that being, that false self being who we are, is so embedded in us and so deep rooted that it's really almost like impossible for us to see that distinction. But this is what the teachings are here for. The teachings are here to slowly unravel and present it to us. So does that make sense so far? I've been kind of rambling on for quite a while. Yeah. So if that makes sense, then we can go into again to the next verses where, as we have seen from the very first verse leading up to the following later verses, the level of the practice was taken on a deeper and deeper levels. Initially is to hold others dear. Okay, we can all relate to that, even on a conventional level. Yeah, in a worldly sense, yeah, you want to hold others dear. If you see someone as being kind or someone as being nice to you, then yeah, we would hold them dear. That is quite natural. So the first verse, of course, was not just to hold a few people, those we consider close to be dear, but we train our mind so that we can hold all beings as being dear. And in a meditation practice, or when everything's fine and when there's no one there to push our buttons, this actually is relatively quite an easy practice. We sit there in a meditative posture, and there's no one to disturb us, and we think, yes, I send out love to all beings, I cherish them, they're really dear. But how about when we are out and about, we come out of our meditation cushion and we're going out to town or driving, and someone pulls in front of us, cuts us short, or someone in line pulls in front of us, or our boss says something, or our kids, or could be anyone, right? How about when those things happen? Are we going to hold them still dear in our mind? If you hold someone really dear, according to the teachings, you can't possibly be angry with someone that you truly love in that moment. Of course, there's this terms of hate, love-hate relationships, right? Well, love-hate relationships, love and hate both can be at the same time. According to Buddhist psychology, love and hate cannot exist in our mind in the same moment. Yeah. So it's only when the love wanes that anger or hate can surface. But as love increases, then naturally the hate and anger starts to decrease. And then when there is true love, in that moment of true love, of course, in a worldly sense, it can be mixed with attachment, but that the more pure that love is, even with attachment, when we can truly love someone. I've seen cases of people, couples who are really kind to each other, really support each other, and as our teacher, one of my teachers I've been translating for recently, he encourages, he says it's wonderful that when couples can be together and support each other, especially in a spiritual sense, to help each other to grow. It can be wonderful. It can be a wonderful partnership. So when there's true love, then there, whether it be for your partner or for your kids, in that moment of true love, you're not feeling angry. You cannot be angry with them. Yeah. So the anger arises only when the love declines, or the moments that the love declines. So here, what we're saying is that when that love and compassion is not really developed strongly in our mind, and especially when there's opposing factors, it may be all well to think that, yes, I would love and hold everyone dear, but when there are imposing factors, conditions, when there are conditions where with individuals and so forth that start to becoming more challenging, which is starting to become more personal, where our self-centered mind is starting to being, when we talk about the buttons being pushed, there can be various different buttons, but ultimately it's that self-centered button, when that someone is pushing, then that's when we become defensive. Our ego is hurt. Our ego is bruised and hurt, and that's why we can't, and that's the last thing, like we want to feel that we have been hurt, our ego being hurt, so that's where we become defensive. And so here, as a way to really train one's mind, the teaching is leading us into more and more deeper levels of how to overcome in each, it is as if it is indeed true that on the spiritual path, each time you overcome some certain challenges, you think like, oh, phew, I'm over that now, then whole new challenge, even a more difficult challenge may present itself. And it seems interesting that, you find many older students who say that, why is it so that the more you practice, the more obstacles or more difficulties seem to arise? But that's because, as you become more capable, actually they say that it's a good sign when obstacles arise, when you're practicing, especially when you're practicing, when obstacles arise, it means that you have a strong mind to be able to face them and even, how should we say, accept them. Yeah? And then it's really interesting how the psychology, the mind, when you just change the attitude, something which otherwise may have seemed like unbearable can be not only bearable, but can be actually accepted and taken upon as a learning process. I think we all would have, to certain degrees, experiences of that in our lives so far. So without going on about this too much, so that we can cover the next two verses, I'll just go into the next two verses right away here. So, which is verse 5 and 6 we are on for this evening. So, okay, here we've got verse 5, which is, when others out of envy treat me badly with slander, abuse, and the like, may I take the defeat and offer the victory to them. Now, this would be, when we first hear this, it really seems like this is by large one of the most far-fetched things we would have heard if we were hearing this for the first time. When others treat me badly with slander, abuse, and the like, suggests that we haven't really done much wrong ourselves, right? It suggests that when one hasn't really done anything bad, others unfairly, seemingly unfairly, is treating us badly, then rather than retaliating, may I take the defeat and offer the victory to them. So here we might feel like, well, this may seem quite unreasonable, but maybe here, as I mentioned earlier, I might share a story here. So you can put me back. We can go back to the screen, sharing screen, so that I can see your faces again. These 8 verses, which I would have heard when I was, many years ago, and quite a young, when in the monasteries, and when I was quite a young youth, and but initially I didn't pay much attention to these verses myself, and then I received teachings of them from the Dalai Lama, amongst others, teachers. And when I heard the Dalai Lama recites these verses every day on a daily basis, I thought, oh, wow, maybe that's something I could do. It's only 8 verses. So I took it upon myself to actually memorize these verses, and then part of my daily commitment, I started just reciting them. But of course, it was just a routine, like part of my everyday recitation, right? So although what I mentioned next, my experience may sound like, oh, I'm maybe boasting that I had put something into practice, but in 20 years of reciting these verses, maybe there's been like I can say maybe 2 occasions that actually I was able to use it practically, that it came to use. So knowing it, and I really got a sense of how the teachers, when they say that, at our level, as a beginner's level, just knowing the words is a good start. Knowing the words as a reminder of these importance of these practices. So in the monastery, we have a tradition of memorizing many texts. So having memorized this and doing it a part of my daily routine, when you memorize something, then it becomes easy to recite. It takes only 3 or 4 minutes to recite it. But because I've recited so many times, of course, listen, I can recall the verses from memory in Tibetan, of course. So there was an instant where back in 2000, I think it was 2002, where I was translating for a teacher in Malaysia. And although he was not my personal teacher, I was doing interpreting or translating for him. And in the monasteries, you learn to respect all elders, all teachers, regardless of whether they're your teacher or not. And especially when they're an elder, when they're an actual Geshe, which means like, a teacher by every right. And he was one of the elder, more actually quite a well-respected Geshe in the monasteries. So naturally, I served my role not only as a translator, but also helping him out whenever needed. And, I had great respect for him. Nevertheless, there were times when he would also be like quite direct and, quite blunt sometimes, but particularly it didn't seem to affect me too much when with other things, right? But there was an incident where it involved me. Suddenly I was the one who he was being direct and blunt with. And it was an occasion where I was interpreting the day's events to him. And then suddenly there was a change in the morning of the events. So although to the best of my memory, right, I have to say that we never know, we can never trust our own memory, but actually, honestly, to the best of my memory, I had actually, I could say with quite, well, as 100% certainty that I had interpreted or translated what we were going to do that particular morning. But there was a change in the program. And after our breakfast or some time, when the teacher was saying, oh, so we're going to go there now. And I said, no, that's been changed. And that's been changed. We're not doing that now. And then seemingly in a little bit of a sort of an annoying sort of blunt sort of way, he said, oh, why wasn't I informed? Why didn't you tell me before? And there's actually, I don't want the story to be too long, but there was a whole follow-up before that, which already made me start to feel uncomfortable and unsettled. And this was an event which was not directly involved with the center. So I was just, willing to do it just for the sake of the teacher's sake, really. But nevertheless, I think my mind was already unhappy. So that was almost like the last straw. When the teacher blurted out that, why didn't you tell me before? I felt, honestly, the feeling, I can still feel it almost to this day, where I felt my anger rising within me as the only illustration I can think of is like a bubbling up kettle, It was like water about to boil. You feel like you can see the bubbles are coming up. So I actually literally felt the anger rising through me. And of course, with anger, then you become, the next instant of after this strong emotion arising, it has to be coming out, right, in some form, because it's a defensive mechanism. So what that anger was about to lead me to do was to blurt out back saying, but I did tell you so earlier. And because of the emotion of anger and so forth, if it did come out as words, without any doubt, it would have been in a very inappropriate manner. It would have been in a manner where I would have lost all seemingly respect to the teacher and said it out in a very annoyed way back to him, right? So that would have not gone well. Just because of the immediate situation. It would have not been respectful of me, but most importantly, I would have perhaps regretted that for the rest of my life. So in that instance, although I felt completely justified in blurting out, but I did tell you so, and I felt that anger rising in me, in that instant, and for me, when the teachers later described that, explained that the blessing is when you change your mind, that is the meaning of a blessing in the Buddhist context. When your mind is transformed, in that instant, you're getting a blessing. I really felt it was like a real blessing in that moment where suddenly I recall these words, offer the victory and take the defeat upon oneself. So in my mind, so instead of blurting out those words, I told you so. In my mind, I said, I was saying in my mind, well, respected teacher, I did tell you earlier, I did inform you, but that's okay. If you felt like I didn't tell it to you, that it didn't mention it, then that's okay. I'll take the defeat. I offer the victory to you. And the moment I thought in my mind, then the illustration I can give you is where the kettle or the water was about to like bubble up, boiling, but then it suddenly was like the fire being turned off. It all started to settle down. The anger started to settle down. And I felt so cool. And I'm quite passionate in sharing this experience because it was like the first time perhaps in my life where from a moment where I could have completely, blurted out and being very unreasonable, just by thinking about these words, really diffused the whole situation. It really calmed me down. And so I think since we do have time, I'll go on to the next incident, which was a little bit more mundane, okay? And I'll give you both versions because I feel it's quite nice. The next incident was where I was in Australia then. This is relatively more recent, a couple of years ago. And in Australia, I was doing interpreting for even local Tibetans who are refugees, so going to hospitals and going to other kind of appointments and so forth. So I chose to go in normal clothes, not my robes, because it was more like a mundane activity, and my teachers approved of that. And then I just thought it would just make it easier. So I went in lay clothes, and then that time, because I was getting a little bit of extra income, I had a car, so I was driving around and of course, quite busy getting to appointments. So this particular morning, I was scheduled for an appointment to do some interpreting work in a hospital somewhere, and I knew that was at 10 o'clock, but I thought I had to do some photocopies. So I timed myself where I would finish my prayers, jump in my car, go to the photocopy place first, and then I would have just enough time after the photocopying to get to the hospital. And you know how we want to control everything when we have our own agenda, yeah? And so I was planning the whole morning out to do everything perfectly. So, of course, in order for that plan to work out, everything has to follow, So I go up to the space where the photocopy shop is, and I try to find my parking. And there was only parking on one side of the road, a narrow road. And I noticed that all of them were filled up. And I thought, oh, now this is going to spoil my whole morning, because now if I don't, I was planning everything to be able to get that parking there. I thought at that time of the morning there'll be more spaces. But anyway, but just as I was trying to think what to do next, I saw a car pull out, and I was relieved and thought, oh great, but then in that very instant, as the car was pulling out, I noticed from the corner of my eye that there was another car up there with its blinkers on as well, indicating that they're going into this parking spot. Now, in this few split seconds, I was thinking, who was here first now? And of course, because I have an old agenda, I was busy. I thought, no, I'm on this side of the road. I'm here, and I guess I definitely must. It must be I've got the right to it. So, and in any case, the other car might have been there earlier, in fact. But because the car is pulling out and having to go up this way, before that car can get in, I can get into the spot. So that's exactly what I did. When this car pulls out, goes out, I get into the spot. Victory, right? I got the spot. But the other car who was there indicating his indicator, the driver rolled down the window, and then the abusive language started to come. And I won't repeat the abusive language here, but there's all the possible foul languages we could possibly think of. And I started, of course, you become And I was not wearing robes, remember? So I started getting upset too. I'm thinking, but and then I started saying, but I thought I was here first, or I'm on this side of the road. So don't, I guess this is where I have the right for this parking on this side of the road. And then the whole thought of, should we call the police and trying to sort it out, occurred in my mind. But I looked at his face again, and I saw that he was like really upset. I was getting upset too, by no doubt, but this person there was no question he was upset and really angry. And so in my mind, I thought, well, this man is really upset. And then quickly I had to assess the situation. If I tried to argue it out, the whole point was for me to get this parking spot so I can photocopy quickly. And it's the whole defeat the purpose anyway, right? And then again, I thought about these verses. Offer the victory to the other, accept the defeat oneself. So again, without further any commotion, without saying anything to him, I got back into the car and started to pull out. And as I pull out, giving the parking space to him, as I was pulling out, I heard another loud horn. I looked around my shoulder, and that car, which was the guy who was just arguing with me, really upset and angry, who was, so determined to get the spot. As I was pulling out, he honked and just drove off. And then I was there, left with a parking spot. And of course, I was shaking a bit, a little bit nervous, but I thought, well, he's driven off. So I might as well take the spot, right? Now it's free. So in the moment, you're not able to process everything. But later, as I processed what was happening, this whole scenario, I thought, first of all, I realized that these robes that we're wearing as a monk, its purpose is for protection, protecting oneself, really. But if I was wearing the robes, even though I might have rightly felt rightly justified to be upset and angry, all of that, I would have not even considered to have an argument with this person, because I would have not want to be a disgrace to other monks, our community. So in order to save the community's reputation, and not personally just myself, but the community's reputation, I would have tried to behave proper and not even started an argument. So the robes would have been a protection. If I had worn the robes, I would not have even started an argument with him. So the robes, I realized, was of course definitely a protection. But what I've discovered more importantly is that more than just the external clothes, the robes, the real protection here was the teachings, the Dharma. Yeah. Even if I was wearing robes, if I didn't have my mind imbued with the Dharma, couldn't recall this, I might have started an argument and even taken it further in an argument and so forth, and it would have been a disgrace. So the real protection, I was not wearing my robes, but despite not wearing my robes and not having to give away that I was, a monk, whatever, it could have still had an argument, but what protected my mind then was these verses, the teachings, the Dharma. And now let's look, when I looked at the moral of the story is of the tears, that when one is really willing to offer the victory to the other, which I was, who ended up getting the victory? In the immediate conventional sense, it was about the parking spot. So although I was willing to give it to him, somehow for some reason, it just left and I got the parking spot. So that was a temporary, conventional, very mundane victory, right? But the real victory, what I started to discover, was not getting upset, not getting angry, not taking it further and making a big scene and protecting my own mind. And so the real victory of all of these teachings here is really protecting one's mind. And I think if you can get a sense of that, then for me, it was one of the first times then to really see the value of these teachings, that it actually works. Of course, I would wish that it works on more times, more occasions. I'm giving you only 2 occasions that it has worked for me in the 20 years I've been reciting these verses. And I'm not sharing, even going into details of the times when it didn't work and when I did get upset, like with recent times with my mom, for example, all the times when I did get upset and angry. So there are times when some of the subtlest buttons are pushed that these teachings or completely go out the window. But we all start somewhere. So for me, that was at least a beginning of to see that, these teachings, and I think that is when the unreasonable part of these teachings is when we think like, but how can I take defeat? Especially if I feel I've not done wrong, or being wrongly accused. When we hear more teachings and we get more details of the different aspects of the teachings, and specifically about karma. Now, for those who have already got teachings and understanding of karma, you would have already heard that there's no unjust experience that we will ever experience if we have not created the causes ourselves. Yeah? No one and nobody can harm us if we have not created the cause to be harmed. And that's a big bite to swallow. But nevertheless, that is what the teachings do explain, is that whatever negative experience we have, whether others are just a condition, but the main cause are the imprints in our mind. And when those imprints are activated, negative karmic imprints from the past are activated, the conditions appear. The conditions appear in so many different forms. And in my life, a constant condition happens to be my mom, the dearest one in my life. Yeah, is the one that can push the subtlest buttons in me. Do I blame her as an ordinary being, ordinary human being? Of course, I blame her. But do I constantly hold bitterness in my mind and really, see her as a source of all my misery? I would have, and I would if I didn't have access to these teachings, if I didn't have some access to these, some explanations up to how. So there's an immediate sense of blaming her in the moment when things are not working well, confrontation, all that. When I go back, cool down, reflect, I start to acknowledge, okay, yeah, I would have created the causes myself. So it seems to take time, but when we do reflect, when we take some personal responsibility, it seems that these teachings do have an effect, do have a way for us to see things in a little bit more clearer light. In the heat of the moments, we completely, our perceptions are completely blurred and completely distorted, that no wonder we get all upset and excited and all of that. And I'm still learning, still struggling a lot, and we're all in the same boat. But the point is that we're all referring to these teachings, which are giving another way to look at situations. So, of course, when the Dalai Lama explains on this teaching, the point here, he makes it quite clear that it's on a personal level that you take this practice for your own personal well-being, for your own practice of your mind, to not get upset and angry. We're taking this into practice. But when there are situations where and as people are causing unjust to others and even to oneself, what the Dalai Lama explains here on this point is that if others are abusing us wrongly and so forth, there comes a time when one may not be so affected on a deeper level, but what they're doing is not right. Not right in relation even to oneself, but more importantly for them. If we allow them to continue their behavior, we are allowing them to also create ongoing negative karmas. So what the Dalai Lama suggests is that after training our mind, we should try to reach a level where we do respond to others and point it out that what they're doing is not right, but without anger, without bitterness, without retaliation in hurting them. What happens is when we're angry, then what we say becomes distorted. What we point out to them is not going to be very clear. In fact, it will be like in a hurtful manner. So we can correct others' misdeeds and point out that what they're doing is not acceptable and not correct without anger, without extreme anger, then it'll become much more reasonable. So does that make sense? It's not reasonable. Yeah? Okay. So let's try to cover the next verse, and then I will take some time for questions. I'm just going really a little bit on the surface of these verses, but just as a way for you to get a feel of it. So the next one is, now if we thought that was challenging, let's go to the next verse. When someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have placed great hope inflicts me with extremely bad harm, may I behold them as my supreme spiritual friend. So can we see here that how it is taking us on a more and more deeper level? So verse 5, what could be anyone who's random, like this other person in the car. I would have never met them in my life, this life anyway, and someone that I might never meet again. It was just that few instance of it, just a few exchange, right? So on it, and in fact, perhaps the reason why I could offer the victor more easily to this person was because they were a complete stranger and who seemed to be so angry. And in fact, I got at least a little bit of a cool of a head in realizing that getting in a confrontation with him over this parking spot is not ultimately going to solve any problem. It's just going to make things worse anyway, right? Even on a very practical level. So it was just a bit of common sense, really, for me to just forget about it, give him the spot. And that might have been, okay, I admit that is maybe on an easier level. But how about with someone that you have really feel close to? Not only close, but you've actually invested your time and energy and believing that you have totally helped them. Yeah. How about someone who's so close that it could be your partner, or more even closely bonded, your own child, or your parent, in my case, my mom? How about those close ones? And so this is where it becomes really challenging, isn't it? With someone whom I've benefited, not just random strangers, not someone who's just, you might never see again in your life again, but someone that you actually invested a lot of time and energy. Perhaps in a lay context, the best example would be maybe a partner or someone that you've really invested so much time and energy in believing that you're working for their own good, you're helping them out, and then when they in return so you've benefited them, and you've had great hopes with them, and you've placed great hope. So when such a person inflicts harms me in an extremely bad way. I mean, here, harming in an extremely bad way could be like on a grave levels, right? But on our very ordinary level, speaking for myself here, I've often felt like, yeah, I can be helpful to others and be kind of like give a little bit of time to help someone else out or whatever. But the least I would expect in return is some appreciation. That's not too much to ask for, is it? It's a very human trait. We would at least want some appreciation. So what I find hard is when after I've spent a half an hour, whatever it may be, or I've been a little bit generous to someone, I thought might have done it out of good heart. But when a beggar comes to me, which happens very, very, very quickly in India or Nepal, like these third world countries, beggar comes up to you, a little bit, feel a little bit generous that day, give something to them. And there are some beggars who look at you and say, you're just giving me this, I need more. And that first nice feeling of being generous and all of that suddenly goes all out the window, and I start yelling at this person like, what do you mean you want more? I've already given what you need. That's all I can give. Leave me alone. So here we can take, so many examples from our own personal life of how, when others were being unappreciative, that's when we really felt like that's going too far. Yeah. So of course, what is being suggested here is that when we take it on a practice level, the hardest, they say, that to practice patience with, and try to seek forgiveness for, practice forgiveness towards is those who one has benefited, for those one has actually benefited. Now, these teachings are, of course, all related to karma, right? So again, it is said that although you might be benefiting someone in this life, you could possibly have harmed them in past lives. So what you're doing now is really nothing much at all in comparison to how one could have harmed them in the past. So that could be returning to oneself in this life. That's when one we're looking at it from the karma point of view. And if we are feeling quite altruistic and we think like, oh, yes, it was not about me. I really was really wanting to help them. But again, on a most coarse level, relating to my own experience, even if I didn't want great returns, like really thinking that they want to help me greatly in the future and so forth, and they'll, return my favors later on. Even on that level of wanting appreciation, we can see here that it is not so altruistic after all, is it? From the practice of bodhisattva's level, there is again self-centeredness mixed into it, our actions. Whatever we did want to seek, we were seeking some appreciation, some acknowledgement. So it was about me. So here it reminds me of a teacher that, one of my teachers' explanation of what true love is, love and compassion, what they are. So the degree of how unconditional love is said to be, can be gauged very simply. Can be gauged very simply by examining oneself, one's motives when one helps someone else. If the primary interest of helping them is actually oneself, then it is not true love. It is not unconditional love. Yeah? But if the primary interest of doing any action that you're doing, especially if you're doing an action that is actively benefiting others, isn't the primary interest for them, then that is true love and compassion. So therefore, if one's deeds, one's actions of benefit was indeed others in the primary focus, if the other wasn't a primary focus, then one would not be affected if there is no appreciation, or if they start to abuse and criticize you. You would be untainted, thinking that, well, even if they don't accept and agree, knowing that one's own intentions were for the best, one will not be affected. We know these great teachers that we are surrounded by. There are some we know I've experienced where, like, you can be very myself, like I've been at times very unappreciative. So some of my teachers, but always forgiving, always accepting. Why? Because it doesn't affect them. When you realize that you're being unappreciative doesn't affect them, suddenly you realize that it's just completely, what they're doing is completely selfless, without anything wish to be returned. Even if you don't show appreciation, they don't mind. Yeah. So again, when we feel inspired, these teachings, when we see that others have integrated this into their life, when we see the positive effect it has on these great beings who practice in that way, at the very least, it can inspire us. It can inspire us to actually maybe, try to put this into practice at one time. And so here, these verses, as mentioned earlier, although the initial composer of the Langri Tangpa is said to have composed it with the last line being, "I will hold them dear and as a supreme spiritual friend." But here, it's presented as an aspirational prayer. So it is actually, "May I hold them as a supreme spiritual friend." And the spiritual friend here is said to be a teacher, right? Like a teacher. So holding we would have come across in many of the Buddhist teachings where the practice you try to reach your practice where you are beginning to see that your enemies are actually your best teachers. Yeah. And it is on a much more deeper level that one is able to practice that. But nevertheless, it is said that if one is inclined to be practicing patience, then how could we ever know how far we have reached in our patience unless there's someone to provoke us? So this person dares provoke us to test how far we have reached on our patience. So this person, in that light, can be seen as being very a dear, great teacher. Yeah. So I guess we all have people in our lives where we might not, openly say, "Oh, great teacher, you're my great teacher," but in our mind, on our practice level, we can do that. So we begin all really on our own mind and level. And this is all about training. And as the last verses here will indicate, we do all of these practices without vanity, and secretly, and especially some deeper level practices, we do it all secretly, meaning that we're not going out there trying to proclaim to the world that I'm here, I'm a great, practitioner, I'm a martyr, I'm not affected. No, we're, as we deal in everyday life, we try to work on our own mind slowly, gradually. So we have a few minutes left for some questions. Hopefully, I've given you some time. So please, how does it work? You raise your hand or unmute yourself, and the host will indicate how this is done.
Yes, please unmute or raise your hand. Alternately, if you'd like to message in the chat, I could read your question out for you. Or any comments, any questions, feel free to unmute or raise your hand.
Very silent.
Venerable.
Yes.
I've just got a question.
Sure.
As you were saying, sometimes when people pushing you too much, and it starts to become quite dangerous, or it could affect your life in a big way. So then maybe you take some wrathful compassion, if you like, as a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So where that's happened with me, and I have been wrathful, I've tried, thought about it, done my purification at the end of the day, but I don't know, silly question probably, but how do you know the line to cross, or is that to do with how not how real or how developed you are? So say someone could hit me and I could walk away, but if somebody's like running after me and like they're saying I'm gonna stab you and like they've got me, then I'm not at the point where, or if you haven't got a knife and they're gonna beat me up, I'm not at the point where I'd allow them to beat me up, say for instance. Um, but the more you get developed, would you just allow that person, if you knew you were going to walk away safely, I suppose? It's all very dependent. I'm just
Well,
questioning.
well, yes. I mean, there's. Are you asking what do we do on a practical, physical level, or what do we do in our mind?
What would we do in our mind? Say, like, yeah, on our mind. Thank you.
So on our mind, in the moment of something which is occurring, of course, it would be very hard to try to put it into practice. So I think that's why, as Venerable Rubina likes to say, she uses a very good analogy of we need to try to align and keep the wheels safe before they fall off. That's one of the recent expressions I heard from her. And I think it's a very appropriate way of saying that these whole trainings we can't expect that they would work. I mean, as I say, it was a blessing. It was not really coming from me. I just having recited these verses over 20 years, on 2 occasions, I happened to somehow just pop in my head this verse. And then I was able to somehow to just practice it then. But all the other times, but perhaps in 20 years and trying to really just even reciting these verses, and really whenever you recite them, the very reason why I started reciting them was because I was inspired by it. Although I was not able to practice it, I was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful that I could practice it like this one day? And when you have examples like the Dalai Lama and who, in face of the Chinese oppression, the communist oppression, I mean, we all know that, right? So, I mean, someone who would have all the reason to feel upset and angry towards others when they practice, then it inspires you. So what I'm proud to say here is that I think we need to take practical measures where, again, using Venerable Rinpoche as an example, we all know that, and she shares very openly about her own earlier life, even before becoming Buddhist, that, no one really could mess with her easily, because she had this wrathful aspect. And we can see that, that wrathful aspect can be preserved, can be kept, but internally, when love and compassion becomes a center point of one's practice, then even the outer appearance can even be useful sometimes. The wrathfulness and so forth, so that people are, stays away. So, and that's why there is room in Buddhist teachings where it says wrathful compassion, as you rightly said earlier. But it is important for us to know that we don't justify certain things just because we think that we're stopping. So it all depends on situations and all circumstances. So without specific, I think each specific case would demand specific ways of how to deal with it, And so I think on a mental level, well, all I can do is share my own personal experience. My personal experience is that, yes, I value these teachings. I value trying to practice not to retaliate. Am I able to practice all the time, especially with those who push my subtle buttons? No. But then I do get upset. And there are times when I realize that, yeah, sometimes I need to step down and put my boundaries when someone else is not respecting them. And it could be very well someone who's quite close to oneself. Usually it is someone close to oneself. And because the boundaries are, easily tread over, you need to set your boundaries. But what I'm starting to learn is that one can set one's boundaries without. The best is one is clear about one's boundaries at the beginning, then it makes it much clearer. But in the moments that boundaries are stepped over, you think that, okay, a little bit is okay, let's be okay, and that's fine. And then what happens, and I notice in myself, is it starts to build up. And then when some sort of unsettling feeling and feeling that your boundaries being crossed over and all of other things are being a little bit unreasonable, when slow things build up, then it may be a very insignificant small thing which triggers something which then suddenly you're blurting out and being very upset. So to everyone else around and in the immediate situation, if you analyze it, it may seem like so trivial, so silly, but actually it's been a build-up, and sometimes build-up of over many years, right? Build-up of deep down issues which have been built up for many years, which could be triggered. And then when that happens, it may seem so unreasonable and immediate for the immediate circumstances, but it is because of that. So I think it really requires, depending on the situation and whatever it may be, even for, like if it's some sort of immediate protection, depending who the other is, yes, if we have to show a certain amount of wrathfulness, like when you go travel in India, the wrathful aspect becomes almost indispensable. If you don't have the wrathful aspect, you'll be ripped off very quickly by all the taxi drivers, whatever. So you see monks and even teachers and geshes using their wrathful aspect, arguing with these taxi drivers who are trying to demand much more than which is the fair share and all of that. So, but what I've noticed with living over many years living with these teachers is that they use that aspect very effectively. But then when the incident's over, it's like nothing happened. Whereas When something throws us off, we get upset and angry, it affects us. If there's like a bad taste in our mouth for the rest of the day. When one has been vocal and stepped down and said this is not right, out of a clear mind, there's times when we also notice that that was the right thing to say, that's done and that's over with. And we know that we're not carrying any baggage from that. We have done the right thing. So I think ultimately we would know. So from the Buddhist point of view, if you've done something reasonable and without anger and justified without anger and resolved the situation and attempt a bit of like, aggressive sort of mannerisms or act, that's totally fine. You didn't get angry. You didn't create any negative karma. You didn't hurt the other. Even if the other's initially a little bit uncomfortable, they will learn that lesson because it came out from a good place, from a good heart. But if there was anger and if there was self-centeredness and self-cherishing mind involved, then the Buddhist teachings have purification practices, as you were saying yourself, Anna. Yes, there are times when we do lose it. We do become a little bit unreasonable, become irrational. But then we are still human beings, and that's why there's the practices. There would be no need for purification practice if we didn't create a negative karmas, right? So one virtue of negative karma, they say, although we would not wish to have any negative karmas, for the negative karmas we've already created, there's one good thing about it, only one, and that is it can be purified. And so I think that's the way. We just have to monitor our life and around the practices where, yes, sometimes we do get upset and angry, but then you just purify, and then each time we're hopefully learning from our practices, from our experiences and so forth, to try to handle the situation a bit better each time. And over the years, I would say, like even with my mom, who's my dearest one in so many ways, but also the one that pushes the subtlest buttons, there has been some improvements. And each time I see her, there's been some improvements. And it's amazing. Who is really changing? Sometimes I wonder, is it me or maybe she's changed? But regardless, if one really takes initiative, one can only be responsible for oneself first, right? One has to work on one's own mind. And that transformation will definitely benefit oneself. And then if we're lucky, it could be a bonus that the other also starts to change, get some positive effect as well. But we can't hope for that. We can't hope to change. If we think we're going around about to change others, we've gone the wrong way already. We can only start with ourselves. And then the immediate beneficiary one oneself, but then hopefully can also help others to change. Does that all make sense? I'm sorry I'm giving a very long answer, but your question was it was a little complex, wasn't it? But
Yes.
Does that help, Anna?
Yes, absolutely, Venerable. It does. It just clarifies a few things instead of maybe falling into, guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a quick one, because I am doing a lot of purification practice of late, and it seems like a lot of incidences or situations are happening and occurring, which can be confrontational, and much more regularly than before. And is that to do with anything with my purifying a bit more than I used to, or?
That things are happening, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't say for 100% certainty, but in general, the teachings do say that when one sincerely wishes to practice, that's when sometimes things surface, things come up, and uncomfortable things come up as a way then to be able to deal with it. If we never look at certain issues, deep down issues, then it will never be resolved. And that's why each life we come back with certain baggages, certain buttons that can be pushed again and again and again. So this life, again, at least we've got access to some techniques and teachings to take a serious look at what's going on. And even if we can't completely fix it, if we can, and then as we look deeper, more things seem to surface. So as uncomfortable as it is and as difficult it is, apparently it is the way that it presents itself, so that for us to be able to go further. I mean, I like this English expression. I don't know where it comes from, but after every storm, there's a clearing. So each storm, we wish it to be the last storm, but nevertheless, after each storm, there is a clearing. And then when we're about to enjoy the clearing, then there's another storm. But, eventually there'll be an ultimate cleaning, which is enlightenment. Okay. Do we have time for another question or not? I'm not sure.
Mary, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Venerable, for the teachings. I really find them very accessible. And you pretty much answered my question with the answer you gave to Anna. But my primary question was about giving the victory to others. And I feel really aligned with that. But then sometimes there comes a point when I feel taken advantage of, or like a doormat, and I feel like my voice isn't heard. Because if I'm doing it without any expectations and joyfully, but then something gets sideways, I don't really know how to deal with it sometimes. Except, so I had that, and then I also posted the link in the chat box for the film.
Oh, you did? Okay, I was just thinking about that, by the way. I think it's only 2 days left to be able to watch it freely online. It said until the 22nd. So I really encourage you, please, if you have got some time, if you have the free afternoon on Sunday with friends or whoever, just watch this. It's really incredible. And Mary, I know, of course, we don't have much time, but your question or your comment you made is of course, again, one of those issues where we wish there would be an easy solution, that we wish there would be an easy answer to some of the problems we have. But many of these issues are very, very complex, and we all know that. And all we can do is take these teachings and try to see, at least privately in one's own mind and one's meditation, to see the value of this and making strong aspirations that, although I'm not there yet, I'm not able to this practice, understandably, where this is practices on the levels of bodhisattvas, right? But nevertheless, may I be able to practice it someday. And, and I think when we are really sincere and we really want to, see some changes, we do find our shortcomings, and with being taken advantage of, that is a big one. I know that comes up all the time, and it's a big one even for me. And I think this is where, again, it relates to Anna's question, is where when we rightly see that this is not right, then I think we have the right to speak up. And we learn to speak up without, I think when we bottle in it too much and we keep it too much, then that's when it blurted out seemingly unreasonably. So I think we have to learn to be more courageous and speak up. But also, it's a very fine balance, but finding the right time, also being a little bit patient. How many times I've had for example, my work environments and dealing with others, where I just had that moment of feeling, but this is not right. And I just have to hold myself back, and I think, wait, Michael, you'll find an opportunity. And in that moment, without any doubt, I know that if I had said it or brought it up at that time, it would have not been appropriate. It would have been offensive for the other. It was not the right time. So just by waiting a bit, somehow the right time seems to present itself, where you can just say it like a light way, or say it and make a comment, whatever, and it's completely understood, and you have made your point. And whereas when you're all emotional and bottled up and feeling when you try to say it that time, it doesn't come out nicely. The point will not be made because you're all upset. Yeah. So I think it does require sometimes a bit of patience, and it's very hard. Being patient is not, for me, basic patience seems to be the last virtue I might develop. But nevertheless, there are times when we just really sort of like bite the bullet, as they say, just hold on a bit, and then there will the opportunity to arise where we can have our voice and it will be heard. And I think when we're really sincere, situations are not going to be always pleasant, but if we, from our part, try to do our best, I think that's all we can do, isn't it? And I think things will eventually kind of resolve and sort out. Hopefully that's the case anyway. Well, I do notice that we're kind of like, I know I'm not too rushed. It's the end of my day, but maybe everyone else has got some plans for the rest of the day. So anyway, I again thank everyone, and we'll be meeting next week. But let's just take a few moments just to basically end on a good note. So we'll just let, of course, these teachings do bring up things and doubts and questions, and all unresolved issues start to surface. These teachings themselves are trigger, by the way, talking about triggers, but in a safe environment, in a way that we can then really look at it, whereas in the moment, in a confrontational moment, then we're not able to look at it and really see it for what it is. So here we let it all sit for a moment, and we just take a few moments to bring our mind settling it down back on the breath. So as we all started with the most positive intention that we could generate, the most altruistic positive motivation we could generate, and everything else, the rest of the time we spent together was followed from that positive motivation. So according to the Buddhist teachings and Buddhist how things work, naturally, it said that our time, the time we spent together, would have definitely been a meritorious, virtuous time. So this virtuous energy or karma that we have created together, merit, other terms, is something we can, which is there, which is we've all created together, and now we invest that into a great investment for for a good return. The best return we can have from this investment of merit that we have created now is that it become a cause, not just to solve our temporary problems and difficulties, but to really become a means to work on more deeper, subtle levels, unraveling our issues in a safe environment, so we can really start to go beyond all the layers and find the real true source of peace and happiness within ourselves. And then with that, then may we be able to genuinely and wholeheartedly be able to assist others in finding that peace and happiness too. And again, as the ultimate goal for all of us is to be relieved from all misery and sufferings, all discomforts, dissatisfaction, and reach the ultimate state of well-being and happiness, may we achieve that state of enlightenment so that we can help all others to reach that state of enlightenment. In short, may we and ourselves and all other beings equally all reach that state of complete enlightenment. So on that very positive note, that is our dedication. We dedicated our merits towards that goal. So we can now slowly come out of our focused meditation and just remembering that essential sort of nature, being of ourselves, which is the purity within ourselves, is what we are always constantly keep. And that will never be destroyed. And these teachings and this gatherings together and all of that is just a way to nourish and further develop that. So with that, we can come out of our meditation now. And we thank you, we thank everyone. And see you next week, hopefully.